Hello,
Yeah.
I am Rowan North. I'm a freelance illustrator and art educator. I focus on mixed media, so I do everything and then some. Sounds like they can hear us now, so perfect. So I do things like make posable dolls, I sculpt with clay, I make hand-bound books, I make my own homemade watercolors, which I just released my new watercolor set for pre-order. Called Elysian Spring, and that you can find that at my website at rowannorthillustrations.org. I will post the link in the Butler room chat if that's all right. And yeah, that's me.
I'm Emily Martha Sorensen. The first thing you should know is that my video isn't working, so hopefully we'll figure out how to fix that before the next panel I'm on. I have been a webcomic artist since 2002 and still update a webcomic, although I'm having trouble with the schedule right now. But I've also drawn a picture book, so I've done that for children's books. I've also, with all of my short story collections and some of my novels, have drawn unique line break images for them. I don't normally do like huge full page illustrations, but I often do unique design elements for everything because it's prettier that way.
Again, my name is Joe Monson. I'll be moderating the panel. I'm an author and an editor and a publisher. So we'll get right into it. Basically, a lot of children's books have illustrations all throughout them, but as you get into adult books, they tend to not have illustrations in them. How do you decide if illustrations are right for a particular work? We'll start with Emily.
For me, there are two factors, really. One of them is, will it make the story better? Will it enhance something? I mean, if it's a story where it really doesn't matter what the exact details look like, then who cares? But if you, for instance, you're writing an epic fantasy book and the geography really, really, really matters, you want to have a map in there, right? Or if Brandon Sanderson's The Rhythmatist has a magic system that's based on chalk circles and lines, and so it has designs after every chapter of a different design element using this magic system, and these illustrations are essential to actually be able to visualize what the main characters are doing. His book Elantris likewise is based on geography, and so it has some illustration elements to it. So so the first factor is will it make the story significantly better or easier to understand? The second element is, how much work will it be, and is it worth it?
Yeah, I'm sure Rowan can talk to that, being an illustrator and all.
Yeah. So thinking about like the different books I've seen, you do have the children's book where, every page typically has a picture. Then you go into the young adult. I think about like Levin Thumps and Spiderwick Chronicles and things like that, where sometimes you'll have the interior illustrations here and there. From there, you see it less and less. However, I immediately think about more graphic work, such as The Sandman, or any of like the Dark Horse. There are Dark Horse comic books, although they're not comics, that are, the page of text and then a full illustration on the other side. These are definitely not children's books. But I think that we all can have a love and appreciation of art from it. I, for one, collect art books, and I love being able to see visuals with it because it inspires me and things like that. So I think that as far as answering, like, how do you know whether or not you should have interior illustrations or not? One, it also depends upon the client. But two, it really just depends upon also cost. Like interior illustrations, especially like with the full color things, that does cost a lot. But from there, I think personally, especially thinking about the horror aspect, because I focus a lot on horror illustrations and things like that. I think that any adult book could do with some illustrations. It really just depends upon what emotions you're trying to elicit.
Yep. Now, I think it might be good to kind of go over a few of the types of illustrations that you might run into in a book. Emily mentioned a couple of these before. There's maps, which kind of show the world and relations between locations and stuff like that. Those you often find, especially in epic fantasy and stuff like that, they almost always will have a map because they're usually mentioning lots of different places. They'll also have little illustrations at the beginning of a chapter or at the top of a chapter. I've seen those a lot as well. And then sometimes there are end paper illustrations. And then there are illustrations that are inserted into the text. So if you want some of those things in your book, how do you go about finding an illustrator to do them? Can you talk to that, Emily, at all?
Just go about finding an illustrator, or I guess I come from the illustration side.
Yeah,
So
I
do you want
mean,
me to talk about
how
my
do people
experiences?
find you? Do they see other works that you've done? Do they find your website? Do you advertise? I mean, how would they even find you if they were looking for an illustrator? How would they find you or another illustrator?
Okay, so I've only done a couple of interior illustrations in books as well as covers. But one of the ones that I did was Over the Hill and Through the Mountain by Bryce Beatty through Immortal Works, which is a local printing company here. That one, they actually kind of scouted me at LTUE. um, I had some of my bigger paintings on display because I usually have like an art booth, art table, either out in the artist alley or I will be a vendor in the vendor hall. And I had one of my paintings displayed, and it was bright, vivid colors, very like childlike. They really liked the style of my work. So there at the event, they asked me about doing this cover for Bryce Beatty. I never ended up talking to the author until after the fact, which is really, really funny, considering we had ended up being in a panel together about artists and writers collaborating. I only talked to the publishers. And it's usually the publishers that will scout. However, there's a lot more people self-publishing. And with that, you can always look, I would suggest social media as the best one. Or I'm bad at social media myself. I'm still struggling to get that going. But normally I'd say events, but well, but
For
I'd say
this year,
social
not so
media.
much.
Yeah, social media. In olden days, we'd do DeviantArt, and you'd find your artist via DeviantArt.
Mhm.
But right now, I'd say it's Instagram and Twitter. That are like the big ones for illustrators. I do post a lot of my stuff on Facebook right now, but
Mhm.
I'd say Instagram and Twitter are like the biggest ones to find artists right now.
Right. So, since Emily's having trouble, I'm just going to kind of talk about it a little bit from the publisher editor end of things, since I have some experience with that. Um, I always keep my eyes out at conventions and when I'm browsing the web or see a new author pop up, I keep an eye out for them and I get their business card or uh, take a picture of their name and examples of their work. I actually have on my computer folders upon folders of example art from various artists just so that I can go browse through it if I have a particular need and find one who I think that one would fit this. So, I mean, that's one way to go about finding it, is to make sure your stuff is out there for people like me to find. So, how do you decide on an art style for a book? So you've had experience with a couple or 3 books, you said, doing the illustrations for them. How do you figure out how you want to do the art? What kinds of feelings or whatever you want to put into it?
So, yes, I've done a couple books, but I also do tabletop campaigns, and I sometimes hand draw the assets for those. Because I a pro GM on the side for a treat. But with those, it really is the mood of the campaign. I did one that is more fairy tale, so I did everything on mid-tone paper to kind of give that old papery feel. I did a very more simplistic, brightly colored illustrations. The next one I did was for the Tickfaw Files, which is a horror. And that one I did all actually this kind of scribbly pen drawings and then did watercolor washes over them to kind of give this dark, shadowy feel. Because I felt like that was kind of the mood. As far as books go, although I haven't done many books myself, the biggest thing is, making sure that you know enough about the book and about the feel that they want and, work back and forth as much as you can. So when I did Bryce Beatty's book, it was a coming of age preteen tween book for girls. That was the mood they wanted. They wanted those bright colors, so I used lots of magentas and blues and purples. And they wanted a kind of cutesy, super fantasy fairy tale style. I asked for details like, what do you want the girl to look like? And they didn't actually think about what the main character was going to look like. There wasn't much description of her in the book. We don't have time to read the whole book, usually as an artist. So in my case, I wasn't even sent the whole book. So usually you have the back of the book, synopses, or you can dig for details when it comes to like if there's specific details you want. Like they wanted a Tudor house village in the back. So I looked up the Tudor style houses and kind of worked back and forth for a bit. Like, hey, is it more like this or more like that? And yeah, it's a whole bunch of like collaborating and trying to understand the author's vision, because they probably do have a vision in their mind, kind of the field of their own story.
Yep, very true. I've seen some publishers will send specific passages from a book to an author where they have, like you said, the character description, so you kind of have an idea of what the character is supposed to look like if that's what you're illustrating, or if it's a scene, maybe a few clips of that location so that you have an idea. So do you have audio now, Martha?
Emily.
Or
My
Emily?
name's Emily.
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sounds like you can. Yes!
Yay!
Yeah. Okay. So only 20 minutes into the panel, finally, I can, contribute. Great. So I have not heard anything you guys have said for the last 10 minutes because my computer was being a pill and a half. So,
okay.
What have you talked about, and is there anything you wanted me to contribute?
One of the questions that we talked about was, how do you decide on an art style for a particular project? So if it's for a book or for poetry or, whatever, how do you decide on an art style?
Well, the most obvious answer to that is, the first thing is it has to be something I personally think looks good and like doing. That's just beyond obvious. But because if you're going to be doing it for the next 20 hours or 50 hours or 100 hours, you better enjoy it and you better think it looks good. After that, I think audience expectations plays into it. If you're doing something for kids' books, a more cartoony style might make sense. If you're doing something that's supposed to be, an illustration for an adult book, you might want a more realistic style. If you're doing something that's kind of anime style, you probably want to try anime style. Stuff like that. audience expectations really plays into it.
All right. And let's see here. I had a question that just fell out of my brain. So,
well, can I kind
Sure.
of add into things that Emily said, because she made some really good points.
Yep.
Yeah. One time I was asked to do a realistic portrait for the cover of this book. I don't do realism. I mean, I can, but I really, really don't like it, and that's not what my style kind of aims towards. I was classically trained, but that's not my jam. And
Yep.
so I actually turned him down and said, go find another artist for that. I still did the interior illustrations for him, but it was like, mm-mm. The other thing I wanted to bring up was the audience expectations. There is something to be said about subverting expectations, to be honest.
Mhm.
Like, yes, audience and author may want particular things, but I think about the Night Before Christmas style. That has played a lot into actually adult illustrations now with the generation that has grown up with that. So I'd say it's come sa with that. I wouldn't say like don't limit yourself, don't limit the author by such things. Do what you feel is best for you. And if you want to subvert the expectations to have really, really gruesome like chibi art, go for it. I'm certain there's an audience for it.
Yep. I've actually seen some of that. So, do you have any? Go ahead.
I think you're absolutely right. Subverting expectations is something that I really like to do in writing. And yeah, doing that in art is, well, that's kind of what art is for, right? If you're repeating what everybody else has always done, what are you adding to the conversation? Try something that's you.
Exactly. So, do you have examples of specific things? I know there were been a few things mentioned that are really favorites where you think the illustrations in the work, whether it's the cover or interior illustrations, really captured the feel of the book. Uh, whoever wants to jump in on that one.
Immediately I think about The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. Sorry, I have a lot of Neil Gaiman examples. That one is actually considered a children's book, but I beg to differ. I mean, it starts out with the parents getting murdered brutally. That's not a spoiler. That's literally the first page of the book. So, but you've got this kind of creepy, kind of sketchy style. For that. Is it all right if I screen share? Because I could do that and show a Graveyard Book.
I'm sure if you have a copy of a picture, that would work great.
Yeah, here I will quickly screen share. Yeah, if you take a look here, the kind of sketch style for the Graveyard Book. It's kind of creepy, This one was I remember this one from when the book was read for me. But yeah, you can see that it's a very, very sketchy kind of gray, very dramatic shadows. And that was just beautiful for that book. I'm going to switch back to video. Here. Doop. Stop screen share.
I can think of a really interesting
Ta-da.
example I read years ago. It was a middle grade book. It was called How to Disappear Completely and Never Be Found. And one of the main characters draws comic pages just for fun, not for a living. He's like extremely antisocial, never leaves the house, and the whole point is he's trying to figure out a way to disappear completely and never be found. He's actually an adult. He's not the protagonist. In a sense, he's the antagonist. And the main character starts finding these mysterious comic pages. And every time the main character finds one, it shows you that comic page. And so you get a real sense of the villain's personality and as well as the villain's plans by seeing it in the villain's own words and pictures. Because you needed it's all about his art, and you need to actually see his art style. You need to actually see how he communicates. So I thought that was a really cool example of mixing comic with novel.
All right. So those are some great examples. Let's see here. Now, I know, Rowan, you mentioned that some of the stuff that you've done included some full color work inside. Is that correct?
I'm trying to think. I'm not sure about there's only been one interior illustration book that I've done, and I'm not sure if it was full color or not, to be honest.
Okay.
I did do the illustrations for him in full color, but it could have been printed grayscale. I never got a copy, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Would you be sad if they were printed grayscale?
No, I mean, so it was actually at the beginning of my career.
Right. Sure.
I was still figuring out my craft and stuff, and they were like supposed to be super realistic. And it was annoying. They were just props that he wanted, like specifically like a shield and a knife that had very specific things, and so it's like, all right, I did it, but it's not like it was the most enjoyable experience. I'm
So-
glad I got that work, but
So you're not talking about full page illustrations with
oh no, it was more like
okay.
tiny little pop in.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Then yeah, not such a big deal if they were printed grayscale.
No, not at all.
So would the only consideration as far as doing stuff black and white line art type stuff or full color be cost, or are there other things that should be taken into consideration with that? Emily, what do you think?
No, for me it's mainly cost. I mainly do grayscale except for covers. But I actually wanted to ask Rowan something very similar, because Rowan, you are a far better artist than I am. So
No, we're just it's different. It's
No
different
question.
styles. No. Don't put yourself down like that. You're beautiful.
I'm not putting myself down. It's just a fact. It's fine. I don't mind. But I was wondering, what makes you? How is your process different between doing grayscale and color? Like, what makes you decide to do something in grayscale?
So there is, for me, it's very scatterbrained process. I have to be honest. As a mixed media illustrator, sometimes I'll have just like this idea in my head, and then I'm just kind of popping all over the place, and even the end results sometimes surprise me. It's a very fluid, like me and the art are just kind of responding to each other. It's really hard to describe, but I'll be working on different sections, or I'll just be pulling like materials out of thin air. My art room is just full of just random junk, and I'll just like, yes, I will use this black 3.0, the blackest black paint for this, or I'll use ballpoint pen because I like the feel of it. Sometimes it's about how the materials respond to each other. Like there is a specific kind of ballpoint pen. It's specifically the Bic ballpoint pen, the one that's like the clear one, that can draw over things like colored pencil and wax and graphite. However, yeah,
nice.
Yeah, I know, right?
I've got lots of those in my house.
That draws over graphite. I've not found another ballpoint pen that does that. Yeah, it's not the highest quality, and when we're talking about archival quality, like that isn't gonna hold up in a museum over 100 years, but they're scanned anyways. So, but knowing, just experimenting with how they interact with each other, these materials, that helps inform a lot of what I decide to do with it. A lot of it is also the mood of the picture. So the two grayscale pieces that I'm thinking of specifically is I have one of a tentacle guy. What's his name? I hope I have it on my website. If not, then I'll make sure that's uploaded after this panel. But he is there, and I've got this scribbly pen background, and he's there, and the only color that he has is like flowers that he's holding. And then there's like a black tentacle that comes up behind him, and he's got black dripping from his mouth. And that was very like dramatic. The theme was kind of like void, darkness, and that I wanted that dramatic black and white. The other one I can think of that I did was the Spider Woman, which everything was black and white except for the red of her lips and the red of the hourglasses on the Black Widows behind her. And that was just like this pop of dramatic and flair. And that's ultimately what it is. It's like what visually looks good to me, what portrays the story that I'm trying to tell, and what does the piece tell me what it wants. I'm sorry that that's not so specific, but
a lot of times that style of illustration where you have spot color here and there works really well for illustration type purposes
I think
because it's so bold like that. Go ahead.
I think my favorite example of spot color like that was a picture I saw years ago called Daddy's Home, with the Grim Reaper and this adorable little girl. And it's all in black and white, but she's holding this giant battle axe with a great big red ribbon on it, and it's clear that he's just given her a present.
Yeah.
And he's like hugging his daughter, and she's got her battle axe and is looking really happy.
That would be a fun picture, I bet. How do you decide how many illustrations should go into a work? If you're looking at it as far as deciding what to illustrate and things, what kinds of things play into that? Do you take into account like age of the audience or anything like that? Not talking about cost necessarily, but how do you decide, does every chapter get an illustration or more than one illustration or every other chapter? How do you decide that? Anybody can jump in.
I think you're thinking, so I'll jump in first. Time. I mean, you said without cost, but time is a cost, opportunity cost, you know? How much fun will it be to do these illustrations? Is it 10 hours of fun? Is it 100 hours of fun? Is it 1 hour of fun? You know, weigh that on how much time I legitimately want to spend on it. And that'll also influence how detailed the art's going to be. The art style they do. Also, though, there is another factor, which is that if the first book in the series was like this, the second and third and so on had better be the same way. Even if my interest level has waned, I still have to do that many because each book in the series has to match.
consistency.
Consistency. It's really, really important.
Very true.
So jumping in, I think also, yes, the kind of book it is also matters. Like if we're talking about kids' books, most of those, once again, are all illustrations with like either some text on the top or some text on the side. That's what's expected. Like as much as I said, subvert expectations, depending upon your audience and the need for the book, that really depends. So if you are doing a children's book, you are expecting you know, at at minimum I'm thinking about a little bit more older kid book, like the tiny little like oh see Pooh Run books, like maybe 7-8 illustrations plus cover and back. But for the older kid ones, you're looking at 12 to 24 every page, every paragraph. For adult books, that's when you've got a little bit more leeway. Adult books, or I'd say young adult books, like was mentioned earlier with subject matter for like high fantasy, spell circles, illustrations showing particular things that need a visual to tell. Otherwise, I've seen some do one chapter, like a heading, little insert illustration for the chapter heading. I've seen ones that it's every other chapter that they'll have a full page illustration on one side and then the chapter on the next. Or somewhere in the middle, there's randomly an illustration. That's not my favorite. That one's not my favorite. It's cool to see it, like, wow, but it feels so stark. It feels like out of place, I guess.
I like an illustration in between chapters. I definitely do not like an illustration when it's in the middle of a sentence, because I'm in the middle of a sentence. I don't want to look at a picture right now.
F you, you're interrupting my reading.
Exactly. But if it comes at a chapter break, then it's a welcome pausing point to admire some art.
So that's just all a matter of preference then.
One picture book series that I really, really like, it's Here Comes Cat. It's Here Comes Valentine Cat, Here Comes Teacher Cat, Here Comes the Easter Cat. There are 5 of them. They're very, very funny, and my daughter loves them, and so I practically memorized them because she keeps asking me to read them to her. But the thing that I really admire about it stylistically is that the entire book is a dialogue between the narrator, who presumably is a human, and the cat, who speaks only in signs with pictures. And it's really, really interesting because one page is a line of text. It's dialogue, but it's not even put in quotation marks. And then there's another page that is a comic, but it's very, very simple. There are no backgrounds. It's very streamlined and, what's the word I'm looking for? Not simplistic, minimalist. It's very minimalist, and it's done well because everything draws the eye, and you get through it quickly. And it's quite a long book. It's like 50 pages. That's really long for a picture book, but you get through it quickly, and it's funny, and it's what you were saying before about subverting expectations, and I agree that that's a valid. The best thing you can do when you subvert expectations is to try to figure out a way to subvert expectations in a way that will delight the audience, as opposed to make them go, huh? It's like, what has nobody ever done before that this same audience who likes this normal style will find fun? And I feel like that author is a very good example of someone who came up with a really unique style I've never seen done before that is legitimately fun.
Right. So let's go ahead and open it up to questions. We're going to have the producer read some of the questions from the chat room. I can see there's quite a few of them. So go ahead with that, and then we'll try to answer as many as we can.
There we go. Chanel asks, do you have a favorite example of books for adults that have made really successful or innovative use of illustration?
I do. There is a book that I love. It's not for everyone, but I absolutely love it. It's called The Asylum for Wayward Victorian Girls, and I don't think it's in print anymore, but you can still get it on Kindle, I think. But this is like half autobiography and half psychological thriller about the artist Emily Autumn, and every page is illustration. This book has its full page illustrations, and it's a conversation between a fake Emily from Victorian era and Emily herself writing in her journal because that's what her therapist told her to do. And it's so the types of paper changed. Some of her photo shoots from being a musical artist. Some are illustrations just scribbled on the edge of the paper like you would an actual journal. There are some like full page illustrations, all themed around mental disorders. It's really creepy. At one point, she has a log of what medication she's taking at particular times, and she's decorated the bottom of the pages with pills and sparkles. And
that sounds cool.
Oh my gosh, it is so cool. And then she also has a journal. This gets super dark, and I apologize. about the time she self-harmed, and she has like a little razor blade on the edge, and blood spatters. And it's like it's horrifying, and the subject matter once again is very adult. These are adult conversations, but it also is a little bit tongue-in-cheek the way that she does these illustrations. So for instance, she has like a drawing on the edge of like a bipolar bear, and it's this very sad looking polar bear on the edge. So that one's my absolute favorite. If you're looking for full illustration, like full art book that still tells a story that really subverts expectations.
All right.
Brings to mind for me is a nonfiction book called Business for the Right Brain by MCA Hogarth. And she is an illustrator as well as a writer. And she decided to explain how to run a successful creative business. And it applies to, she tried to make it applicable to any kind of creative business, even things like music that she doesn't do. And she does it through words, but then she also does it through comic illustrations, because she has decided that writer, artist, and marketer are three different people. And so she has the three versions of herself, writer, artist, and marketer, all interacting as jaguars, as furry jaguars. And it's entertaining, and it's fun, and it's very informative, and it's one of the best nonfiction books I've ever read regarding how to run a creative business. There's loads of books out there like that. Writers like to write, so writers write books about how to write. But this one really stood out to me. This one was really good. So, Business for the Right Brain by MCA Hogarth, Hogarth, in case that's something anyone wants to look up. I thought it was really good.
Really quickly, I know that we don't have a lot of time. I want to get through more questions. Also, Hyperbole and a Half by Alison Brosh. It's more of a comic, but she is dealing with more adult subjects, and it's all in like a really, really garbage MS Paint style, and it's amazing.
Okay. So we have time for one really short question, one more. And then after the panel, we'll be over for a few minutes at least over in the chat room just to answer questions there. So
okay.
Go ahead.
Antoinette asks, is there more wiggle room for artists or writers to have more say or input in their cover design process and the art incorporated inside the book in traditional publishing?
I might be able to answer that just because I do the publishing end of things. Most of the time in traditional publishing, the writer has almost no say. Pretty much, I mean, unless they have a little bit of an established relationship with the publisher, where they might have a little bit of, I can ask for these things and you have to include it. Most of the time, the writer is going to have zero say in traditional publishing.
That's actually
go ahead.
That's actually one of the reasons I self-publish. I'm jealous. I don't want other people bringing my characters to life. I don't want to have no say in any part of the process. I want the art of it all, the actual layout, the fonts, the internal illustrations, even the cover art. I want to have a say on all of those things.
Yep. And as far as the artist goes, it really depends on the artist and the contract with the publisher. If it's a really well-established artist and the publisher's worked with them before, the artist will often be given a little bit of leeway as far as how to do the image, because the publisher knows what to expect and the artist knows what the publisher wants. So if it's a new artist working with a new publisher, usually they're a little bit more tight with how to do things because they don't know how the artist works yet. So that's pretty much the way it works in traditional. When you move to independent publishers or small press, a lot of times there's more collaboration going on where they'll be a little more open between the artist and the writer and the publisher on what the art ends up being.
Joe, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my experience was with a small press and publisher, and I feel kind of lucky for that. So that meant that basically the publisher, when I asked a question about what design they wanted, would go to the writer and ask that question and then come back to me. So it was like a weird middleman situation, but it meant that I had more leeway and more of a chance to understand what the writer wanted from me.
Do you work with self-published authors? The direct conversation.
I have not yet. Once again, I've only done 2 books as of right now. Everything that I do currently is I do a newsletter illustration, and that's once again very self-published. That's they send me the story and I do whatever, pretty much. Send me the article and I do whatever. But yeah, I haven't worked with a self-published yet, although that is going to change very soon. I am actually working on a fundamental RPG book. I'm doing some of the interior illustrations for that. It's a tabletop book. So, yes, I'm working with that currently, but I'm not done with that process yet.
So I think we're pretty much out of time now. We don't have more than a minute or so. About 3 minutes. Okay. So if you can each take about 1 minute to just kind of last anything you want to say, anything you want to share. We'll start with Rowan this time and then Emily.
Final words. I guess to kind of sum this up, no, it's not just for kids book, although there is different expectations for each. You can still have like full illustration book and it be an adult book. But there are a lot of things that play into it as, once again, expectations of author, publisher, the cost, time, and things like that. But ultimately, especially once you get into self-publishing and small press, you can really mess around and subvert expectations. So don't be afraid to.
For me, I would say this is something you want to do, have the guts to try. When I was 18, was a terrible artist, absolutely terrible. And I didn't notice actually how bad I was. That was how bad I was. But I decided to start a webcomic anyway. And you know what? I'm extremely glad I did. And I have no regrets about how bad the art was at the beginning, because terrible is the first step to getting better. So if you want to do something like this, don't be ashamed of being terrible. If you are, just work to get better. Study and practice and do equal amounts of both, because this is an insight I got from an LTE about 5 years ago. Study and practice each plateau if you're only doing one of the other. If you want to do a really good job, if you want to improve the fastest you possibly can, you want to do equal amounts of both, and that's how you will climb. If I could be forgiven a math example, you get the most surface area if the sides of the square, or sides of the rectangle are the same. 3 hours of practice, 1 hour of study equals 3 units of value. 2 hours of practice, 2 hours of study equals 4. So do equal amounts of both. I strongly recommend that. I made the mistake of doing almost no practice and no study for over a decade, and I improved incredibly slowly as a result. So that's my advice.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching.